Hello everybody and welcome back to our shared experience. This is episode 2 and today I'm going to start with a very important subject in my life, which is creativity and the value of it. In parkour, my life and my sort of career has shifted into being a little bit more creative and tapping into that, into my movement and designing really unique lines. But I think more importantly, creativity has been probably the number one source of my success. And, you know, I recently said in a post that creativity is the key to the gate of originality. And I think that's also to be true with anything, right? Like, it is how we dissect anything that comes our way. It has to relate to creativity. It's the way we creatively approach any situation or subject. So, you know, a lot of people ask me, like, how did you get to where you are? How did you become a stuntman? How did you do this stuff in parkour? How did you host a tour? And to be honest with you, I think so much of it I can relate to my creative problem solving. I've never been handed anything in my career. I've always went around back and tried to figure out, you know, there's something called the third door. And I believe it's a book and maybe even a podcast. But it is an incredible concept of trying to find the third door, not the front door or the back door, but is there a third way in, a way that no one's waiting at, that no one has discovered yet, that you can figure out. And I think, you know, so much of my life has been like doing that. And I've also failed a bunch of times trying to do that. Like, I've wasted a lot of time and energy in trying things. And actually, I'll retract that statement. I never wasted any time or energy. I always just tried, and if it failed, fine. You know, one of my favorite sayings is fail fast. Because I think too many people get stuck in trying to make the perfect product or wanting to make sure their skills are incredible before they present it to the world. But you learn so little from just staying in your own bubble and just like trying to work on something very specifically. You know, there's one of my beautiful metaphorical things, and I don't know if this is true or not. It might actually be something that was done, but I love it as a metaphor regardless. Is there was a ceramic teacher, and she had asked her class, she divided them in half. She said, all right, half of you are going to make, your assignment for this class is by the end of the class, half of you has to make the perfect pot, ceramic pot, right? And then the other half just has to make as many as they can make. And then what ended up happening was throughout the class, you know, the guys that had to make the perfect pot are just sitting there working on one pot perfectly, and they're just working on it. By the end of the semester, they have this somewhat perfect pot. And then the other half, who just had to make as many as they possibly could, also ended up with a perfect pot at the end. But the problem was that the people that spent the entire semester working on one pot to make it perfect couldn't replicate it immediately. They had to restart over and figure it all out and go through the process again. But the people who worked on as many pots as they could figured out all the flaws. They worked through all the designs. They learned so many more lessons by not being afraid to fail each pot along the way. And I think that's a beautiful metaphor about life and career and success, right? It's like, if we're too worried about failing, then we're never going to achieve the next step. So anyway, I love that metaphor. I think it's really powerful. And I think, you know, tying it back to creativity, I think creativity is everything, right? And there is no single way to do any one thing. And, you know, if I look at my life in the stunt world, you know, like, at first I came out here and I was so hungry to be a stuntman, an actor. And I ended up getting lost in it, and I was going to acting class, and I was doing all the parkour stuff, and then there was some stunt stuff, like a bowling stunt hustle, and I, like, you know, break the rules. I ended up, so you can sponsor a lane, like, oh, Tempest Free Running sponsors a lane, and money goes in. And what I did was I was like, I'm going to sponsor a lane, but I'm going to have it say, who the hell is Jesse La Flair? And then in the basket, I gave this like QR code and this brochure that said, who the hell is Jesse La Flair? And the idea was to at least pique people's interest in like, who is this guy, right? And you know, for some people that was like, oh my God, this is gross. Who is this cocky kid coming into town who thinks he is? What is this? And for other people, it at least piqued their interest and it got my name in their mouth. And then that was a piece of it. The other piece was at the same time, I was building my skills as a free runner and parkour athlete. I was working on all my stunt stuff. And I always tried to bring a new flavor to how I market myself to the world and how I'm presenting myself. And even this podcast / video on YouTube is a way for me to creatively reinvent the way that I am developing myself as a person, as my ability to speak to others, to host interviews, and produce, right? Because at the end of the day, I am creating this, I'm producing this, and I'm marketing myself. But hopefully, that's not just what this is, right? Like, so much of what I want to do is tap back into the person I was, which was someone who loved to help people and help inspire and give and take the knowledge that I have and give it to others. And for a while, I stopped doing that because it became the cool thing to do. And you know, that's another subject we could step into, is like, creativity might be the key to the gate of originality, but what I feel like I tend to do is I pull back anytime that something is being done that I'm doing. You know, even in parkour, it's a very, I tend to try to stay away from other people's styles, because if I'm doing something that someone else is already doing, then is that really me doing it? And you know, in life, I'm like that. In art, I'm like that. You know, I went to school, I got my Bachelor's of Fine Art in sculpture, and so many of the classes, they'd be like, oh, your piece is very similar to this famous artist who did this in the 70s or whatever. You should research them. And part of me was like, I don't want to research them. This is my expression of myself. And if I'm creating something that is very similar to a very famous artist, I feel like I achieved something. But in a lot of the professors' eyes, it was like, yeah, but you don't know your art history, and you're doing something someone else already did. And for me, that was like, well, that's the reason I don't want to know art history, right? So I find myself constantly trying to be original, and it sometimes is very like limiting, but at other times it's also like very powerful, because it essentially is allowing me to always break the rules. I'm always looking at the rule and then going, but can I do this differently? You know, and whether that's a career in hosting and speaking and filming, directing, or you know, being an actor or a stuntman. So I encourage you to always try to take the situation and see if there's an approach, a third door, a creative way to go around and do it in a way that no one else has ever done it. And maybe it doesn't need to be completely original, right? Maybe it's actually pulling from this type of person or this career or this artist or whatever, and seeing how you can mix those inspirations and pieces together to create your own original concept or approach on any problem. I think that's it for today. I don't know. Let me know what you guys thought if you're watching this on YouTube in the comments section below. Otherwise, if you're listening to this on Spotify or any of the major podcast platforms, leave a review. Be sure to subscribe to the channels, and thanks for listening and watching, guys. Bye-bye.